Welcome to photoreal environments for film and broadcast. Before you is the masthead image that I created for the course. It's also one of the environments that I'll be using to kind of go through and create mini tutorials for you guys over the next 8 weeks. There'll be about 6 that will be encompassed in this environment, and then there'll be a series of other environments and kind of mini tutorials as well. The focus of this course will be organic environments, not so much architectural. However, each of you will have an environment, one or more, that you will pick and focus on for the next 8 weeks. You are encouraged to do something architectural and use the organic modeling techniques and tools that I'm going to teach, but you don't have to. You could do something more like this, or a hillside, or excuse me, a valley, anything that's more nature related. So the expectation with this course is that it is intermediate to advanced, and that means that there are things that I will gloss over because I expect that you already understand them. For example, I will not be showing where primitives are, how to do very basic modeling. However, I will be going into ZBrush and showing you guys different ZBrush techniques. We will go over, modeling of the trees and some advanced techniques for that. We will go over retopologizing inside of ZBrush, or rather decimating and bringing those objects back into Max, and some things that you want to do when you do that. We will be going over texturing, shaders, rendering, render elements, the render layers, things to set you up inside of your comp program of choice, whether it be Nuke, Fusion, After Effects, Photoshop. For the majority of the class, I will be focusing on things for a still image, because for an 8-week period, it'll be easier to break it down that way. But the expectation is that these environments that you will build will be robust enough that you can put a camera, an animated camera, inside of here and really kind of move around and have a beautiful animation. But we won't really be focusing on taking it to that level, but it'll be setting everything up for you to take it to that level. So what am I looking for you guys? Each of you will be picking one or more environments. I encourage you to try to find one environment. Environment for the purposes of this course will be more of an organic environment in nature, so woods, hillsides, cliffs, things like that. If you would like to do something kind of architectural related, by all means do. If that is your background, I encourage you to go outside of your comfort zone. Maybe if that's not, and it's something that you've always wanted to do, then likewise I encourage you to do that. That being said, each of you will pick an environment. You're going to focus on it for the next 8 weeks, but we're kind of going to break it down into small chunks that you can focus on and make kind of mini tutorials and mini steps with. So we will 1 week focus on building a tree, another week we will focus on building small vegetation that you will scatter around using forest pack, so on and so forth. So with that being said, start to think about where or what type of environment you want to do. You will be needing to go and collect reference. There's another video where I talk about what type of reference I'm specifically talking about, but Google, Vimeo, I'll say it in the other video and I'll say it again here, get yourself a Vimeo account, follow me, follow everybody else in the class. That way we can all see each other's likes. This is a great way to collect reference. So with that said, start thinking about it, and I'm going to walk you through now what we'll be kind of covering, and then we'll talk about your first week's lessons. So this is the beginning of that environment that you just saw. Kind of walking through, I normally start with a scale reference object. So, well, first I start with gathering reference. So you can see some similarities here between this environment and the previous environment. I wanted something with more of a hero tree out in front, so I could really focus on that for the purposes of the course. But some of these are definitely referenced for kind of the hillside. This is for that tree specifically. It's out in front of my house. Others are, well, here's for the bark as well. And then looking at, you know, things growing on the hill, on the cliff and whatnot. I was thinking about, you know, what type of scale I wanted to do. So this is something much more grand and broad. Would be equally, you know, cool. Again, a little bit more grand. So then I started to think about something a little bit more like this in scale, and this as well, and looking at, you know, the textures and what type of stone I might want to do. So ultimately I came down to this type of scale, and then started to think about, well, how big is this perhaps, and how big is the tree, and so on and so forth. So I start by maybe putting in a camera. You don't have to, not yet at least, but I made a plane or a box, and it was 46 feet by 24 feet high, and then, you know, culled out the other geo with the edit poly to get rid of the other stuff. But that's kind of the scale that I wanted to start to work on, and was thinking that, you know, the waterfall would be about 20 feet tall, something like that. So once I've done that, get my onion back. This is the tree grunt. I'll go over that in another video. This is part of the Blur dev tools, and this is the onion. This is what we use at Blur for our layer manager. This is the old onion. So I know in the Blur dev tool video I talk about that I'm going to try to get some of the other tools up and running. That's still in the works. So for all intents and purposes, when and if you do get Tree Grunt working inside of your system, you will see, you know, you can search up here, and let's see, we can also do quick render, and you can find tools in here. Onion, I recommend this, but it's not a requirement for the course. There are two of them. The Onion, and this is with this little max with the exclamation point. This means it's a legacy plugin. This one will definitely work. This one might not work for you, and it might throw a Python error. So I recommend just starting with this one. You can try this. This is the new, you know, hot shit, and it's much cooler, but this still is a lot better than, you know, the standard max for organizing and whatnot. You can see it. This is a hot mess, whereas here I can label groups and reorganize these based on, you know, my own specifications. So I recommend installing this, and I recommend using it. With that said, we can kind of talk about how to use the Onion a little bit more, but really it's not that complicated, and you can just kind of mess with it. But the big thing up here is this organize button. Click that, and you can start to add groups. So I can say add a group, and it comes down to the bottom. I can rename that group, you know, testing group. And then you can click and drag this guy all the way up to the top if you want. So now when I apply, it takes a moment to refresh, I have a new group, testing group. Now with the new Onion, you don't need this organize flyout that is created, and you can actually rename here, click and drag, shift click, and do a whole bunch of nice kind of on the fly editing. this old one, you need to have the organize tool open, and in order to make these changes, but still much more organized, I think. All right, so we can apply. Well, actually, let's delete this guy. So that's a right click to get that flyout menu. So right click and you can rename, delete all groups and layers. So once we apply, the onion organize will close, or not. So that's what I'm using, and you'll see me using it again and again and again. So I start with a scale reference, and then I go to like a base massing geo, and this is really just that plane, some cylinders and spheres and boxes, and then I'm starting to think about what is the structure of the rock face, and very base laying that out. And these are just boxes with and let me show you, let me prove it. So this is a box with a FFD on it, just to kind of start to get the shape that I want, and then an edit poly to pull that out. This is the level of detail I'm expecting for the massing models that you guys are going to do this week. Very, very basic. Really, thinking about scale and composition. So once I do put a camera in here, and I encourage you to put multiple cameras in your environments, just so you can start to think of them from different angles. Also thinking of them maybe from, this would be my starting camera, this would be the end of the camera as far as a camera path through the environment. And then maybe you can focus on a couple of shots. At Blur, we generally model the environment first, and then layout and animation, those things are kind of going on in tandem. And we model the environment a lot more broad than what the camera might be, because those things are always changing. So we want to know that we're covered, and I encourage you to kind of do the same. Make the environment detailed out much more than what this single camera that you might put in there is. And so once you get the camera in, or cameras, start to compose the shots and move around. I close this guy and just move this off. I've got a second monitor. I'm sure most of you will as well. So start to compose the shot. Maybe I'm thinking the tree kind of needs to be closer to the cliff, or bring it over a little bit more. But thinking about these things while you're placing your primitives and basic geo in here. So this works really well for this type of environment at this scale, but there are lots of different types of environments, and I just want to be clear as far as expectations for other types of environments. This could be something more like a cliff or series of hillsides. I'm looking at doing a fully procedural rice field. That's kind of what this is, and this will be a future lesson. But this is also acceptable for a massing model, and this is very basic. Let's go over it. Okay, so what this is starting with a plane, and you can see, let me just go through this. Turn these guys off. Really? One at a time, apparently. Shift click ignored me. Alright, so start with a plane. And let me open up my material editor because it's pertinent. And just throwing a noise on it, right, with some fairly significant values, because this is going to be a terrain. Turbo smoothing it to get more tessellation, 3 iterations in this case, and then adding a displace modifier. So hopefully everybody is familiar with that, but in the modifier panel, displace, and in this displace, I'm adding this bitmap, or not a bitmap, but this noise. So the noise is, just make sure it's in my material editor. So it's a fractal with a high of 0.91, low of 0.25. So this is just to make more contrast. And then the size is rather large. And furthermore, I have modified my output with a curve. So this will make, let me show you kind of what this will do. That's on the cliffs themselves. So if I pull this guy in, nothing will happen because it's not applied. Awesome. Alright, here's the applied one. So clicking and dragging that apparently did not instance it up. Makes me look a fool. So if we slide this guy, you'll see that now the valley floor is kind of more open, whereas if I wanted, you know, more hillside and whatnot, I could drag this guy over, and now I have a much smaller valley floor and a lot more hillside. So this is a perfectly acceptable way of doing a massing model as well. Once you're done with this, you would have to start to think about, all right, well, where is my camera, and where will the focus be, and then you would have to further detail out, you know, maybe a couple of areas. This, let's say we did put a camera right here. You know, this hillside here would definitely need some love, and you would have to break this out. So going through this a little bit more, the UV map was to scatter. I'm using that to scatter a forest pack through the scene, and it's just a checker stretched out, very narrow. We'll go over that, so I'm not going to spend much time on that this week. Further noise. So in the other example, or before I had changed the polys, this was really like isolating just the hills themselves and then giving them an additional noise up on top, and then turbo smoothing that one time. So this is a pretty common technique, using a displacement and noise to modify a large terrain. So you might want to do something like this, and that would be great. So once you're done with that for this week, and you put a camera or one or two in, and you start to think about where that detail is going to need to be, you're going to need to refine your massing model. And what do I mean by that? So if we go back to this guy here and open up our trusty onion, or bring it back onto the screen, so you can see I have this step 3, refining your massing. So I'm refining with the thought of going into ZBrush, and that is specifically I'm refining these objects so I can get or create objects that will allow me to have more detail. So let's look at this and this guy. Alright, so this object here, this was the original object that I placed in for massing, right? Then I created this piece. So this is a much smaller piece of geo. Now, why? This big piece, if I bring this into ZBrush and I start to subdivide it and whatnot, it's going to take millions and millions of polys so I can get the detail that I want along this front face, right? Because my camera is looking up at this from, you know, this vantage. I know I need a lot of detail in here. Where I don't need a lot of detail, however, is up here, along the sides, back here. This is all useless. So in order to kind of think ahead, go a step further, I make these small objects, and again, this is just, you know, a plane, and then I added a shell to it to kind of shell it out. the topology will not matter. We're going to recreate these objects inside of ZBrush so that it can be very, very rough. The dynameshing tools inside of ZBrush are really pretty awesome, and it's going to allow us to work at a very kind of rough level and then endow it with just a ton of detail after the fact and then bring it in. So you can really, really work very rough, very messy. So that's what I mean by refining it. So in the context of this kind of procedural environment, that might be, so once we have, you know, this guy, and I'm going to just turn off some layers or some modifiers here, specifically these guys. It might be that, as I was saying before, you want the camera to be down here. So you wouldn't want to bring this entire object into ZBrush. You would want really maybe like this area and maybe over here as well. And we might be able to get away with keeping this 100% procedural, this area back here. So then what would you do? Create, you know, an edit poly up on top of that. And come over here and grab this cliffside here. And we might. That's how. A little bit more than we want. It's perfect. Oh, sorry, my hotkeys on my personal computer and my work computer are different. Very smart of me. All right, so we want to isolate this area over here. Good old nitrous. Oh, maybe we want a little bit more. And you can see, like, it's very, very rough. And that'd probably be good. So we could take all of this. Well, we want these interfaces. You don't need to watch me select lots of polygons. But what we would do is take all of that and detach it. In this case, I'd probably detach it as a clone, so you have your original kind of reference geo, or that base geo, before you take it in. So we might call this to ZBrush hillside A, right? Because we might be taking a couple of them. So I'm going to detach this as a clone into a separate object. So now we've got our original hillside, and then we've got this hillside that is going to be what will go to ZBrush. And that is really the extent of refining something like that, this type of mesh. Whereas if you needed to be refining like this waterfall, you know, obviously we're making smaller pieces of geo, so we can maximize the topology inside of Max. So now, kind of going into what you'll be doing, let's look ahead, right, to the next couple of weeks, because part of doing this is knowing what you're going to be doing and planning for that. So here you can see this is decimated test old. So I do a lot of like going back and forth in ZBrush while I'm sculpting. This is frequently what you might be in there, you're making all this like awesome detail, something looks super sweet, and you think it looks cool, but you bring it back in and you do a quick render of it and it just looks like crap. So because of that, there's a lot of back and forth, and I encourage you to not get your head in a hole like an ostrich when you're working in ZBrush. It's very easy to do that and to try to make the best sculpt on the planet, but oftentimes, especially for stuff like this, the best sculpt on the planet will not equate an awesome looking surface when rendered inside of Max. So things need to be a little bit more exaggerated in order to get that surface detail and whatnot. And because of that, there's a little bit of like back and forth every time you kind of go to do a different type of surface. There's lots of different types of rocks, granites, schist, whatnot. Each of those have different personalities to them, and they kind of their surface normals break in different ways. So because of that, you'll kind of go back and forth, and I'll encourage that, and we'll go over that more next week as well once we're in ZBrush. But you'll see I've got this test, and once I started, this like refining my massing model, I start bringing that in and testing. And this was actually, I screwed up, or not screwed up necessarily, but it's kind of while I was thinking of what I was going to do. And you can see, like, I brought this massive chunk into ZBrush and started, just quickly sculpting on it just to see like what type of form I might want to create here. And really, this is kind of a fail because all of this detail, all of these polys, and this is a decimated object, but you can see kind of what ZBrush does to it. But at one point inside of ZBrush, there were lots of polys here just wasted, and really where I want my surface detail is up here and then here and whatnot. So I did that and thought about revisiting it, and then wound up with something more like this. So this is the actual cliff face, and maybe it doesn't look much different, but what you can see here is, one, it's very high poly, but two, if it will let me isolate, so now instead of that one large mass, I broke it down into little components, and this is one piece. Now, also what I started to think about was, I've got this large surface area to cover. I don't want to have to sculpt this entire thing, so maybe I can break this down into chunks and components that I can start to copy around, because really you only need like 3 to 5 variations of an object, and then shade them differently, put vegetation on them different, and copy them around, rotate them, move them. That will be enough to trick the eye into thinking that there's all this lush variation and just tons of really cool detail. And really, that's what I wound up doing in this case. Is there are 5 different chunks that create this cliff, and they're all kind of stacked up on top of each other and moved in different ways to get that variation that I was looking for. And you can kind of see this like sandwich that I built. But here's one of them. I needed one that would kind of jut out and have a larger surface underneath, so you can see like 1, 2, 3 copies of that guy, and he's kind of rotated different. Then you'll see these blocks, and then they're here, and then I copied them back over to here as well. So when you are doing your massing model and this step of refining, that's what we're talking about. So here you'll see, like, I didn't even refine down here because I started to think, well, you know, I don't need to do that. I'm going to, you know, sculpt these guys, and then I'm going to copy them down here. And I was thinking about making another variation here, but ultimately I didn't do that. I moved away from that and just created the detail here. And this large piece as well I got rid of. And then I needed a couple of kind of like schist-like slabs. So I brought these guys in as well, and again, just kind of copied them around. So you can see like these pieces that these guys are copied over to here as well, and then I put, you know, different vegetation on them, so you don't see that this is actually this. You know, they're copies, and you know, this cliff face here is actually this cliff face up here, and so on and so forth. So spend your time, you know, wisely and put the detail in only where you need it. So once we'll do that, so we'll sculpt these cliffs or whatever your environment is. It might be that you'll be sculpting a hillside, a larger rock surface, or maybe you want to do ruins, and we'll talk about that as well. You know, more architectural type stuff. I encourage you to think about an environment that will use some of these skill sets and allow you to practice them. If perhaps you don't want to, you know, your grand environment to have cliffs or whatever, then maybe think of a way to do a like a small mini image or something like that, a macro shot, or something that focuses on that one skill set for week 2/week 3. I do, however, encourage you to try to stick with one image. The more you can break that one image down into multiple sections, I think the more successful you will be, and the more time you can spend kind of delving into very detailed you know, things. Very detailed explorations, you know, on that object, the shader, surface details, things like that. If you try to bite off too much, then my concern is that, you know, you won't spend the time where you need to when you had it in the first place. So this will be week 2. We'll be sculpting, and I'll show you techniques in ZBrush, lots of different techniques for doing very hard surface kind of organic type things. After that, we'll be doing hero vegetation, and this is grow effects, and this is the tree as it rendered. One of the reasons why I really like grow effects is this, you know, you can, in screen it's very, very light, or in viewport it's very, very light, and it basically just looks like splines. But then at render time, you know, we get something very detailed, and also these are very easy to kind of control and make. You can add V-Ray displacements on them with caution. That takes a lot of memory. You can make lots of different, you know, seeds. Once you make one tree or one plant, you can make variations of it very easy by changing this seed number. The other nice thing about grow effects is you can see it's all inside of Max. So we stay in the native program the entire time, which is really pretty great. So once we're done with that, and so this can be a hero tree, a hero plant, flower, whatever it is for the environment that you're going to make, start to think about, you know, how you're going to break that environment down into these chunks. So we'll do this kind of hero plant, and he has some, like, the flowers on it. Those are another component. And then the next week we're going to start to create a library, again using grow effects, and this will be here we go, thinking about going into forest pack as well. So on week 5 we're going to be scattering things around, and we will need to have stuff to scatter. So perhaps your environment is is more of an urban, something with like urban decay, and you decided to, your ZBrush stuff is all about sculpting buildings, they're broken down and rubble and all that stuff, and then you need kind of vegetation and leaves and whatnot, like to scatter. So we will create all of those objects, different leaves to scatter. You can see in my environment here, there's, you know, flower petals in the water and whatnot. So that's one element. These firs, little kind of weedy guys, pieces of moss stuck on the rock surfaces, moss on the tree as well. So we'll create all of those little details that will scatter around the environment. And this is when you're going to really start to see your scene come to life, is once you start to accumulate these little libraries that will start to create, and then start scattering those about, things are really going to come together then. One thing I would encourage you guys to share these these libraries that you create, because when you're done with this course and you go out and you want to create more environments, if everybody takes the ones that they've created and everybody shares them, each person here has a mass of tools that they can start to scatter about and get an environment up and running a lot quicker. You know, at Blur, we kind of have a master file that we bring into other environments and pick and choose from these things, and we're all kind of constantly adding to it. If I make a plant, we'll add it to it, and the next artist that goes to make an environment, well, he's got that plant plus the plants that other guys made as well, and we use that as our kind of base. And each of you, if you guys all share these libraries with each other, you will have a base like that you can start your environments with, and it really gives you a leg up. So I encourage you to do that, talk amongst each other, share assets. That is absolutely encouraged. Sharing textures, shaders. There's no, original, like I made this here, okay? Everybody is a team, and you guys are all in this together, and I encourage you to kind of start to think of it that way. So once you've created the libraries, and that's what we'll be doing in week 5. Also, some weeks are maybe a little lighter than others, so you can kind of catch up. I'm trying to anticipate what you guys might come with as far as your ideas for the types of environments that you want. Maybe some will have grander scopes than others. So if you are one of those people, I would like you to be able to, come along with us and not get too buried. And people that are taking things that maybe aren't as grand, I'm really going to push you in making it as detailed as possible and really, focusing on the minutia to make it really just an awesome environment. So once we've got these kind of libraries, then we'll get into week 5, scattering them about, and you'll see these little kind of point cloud guys all over the place. Let's go look through the camera. So this is then what I've scattered about basically, and it doesn't look like much here. One of the nice things with Forest Pack is you can visualize these guys as point clouds, and you can control the density of that point cloud, and it makes it very nice in viewport as well. So again, you kind of see it this way here, but then at render time you get all of the nice detail. So week 7 or week 6, rather, it's kind of skipped here because we're going to be getting into more shaders and whatnot. In week 2, I will talk about shaders specifically for kind of rock and organic hard surface objects, and that'll be kind of our first step into it. We will be talking more about shaders really with every lesson. When we do the hero tree, we're going to talk about barks and leaves and different techniques that I use for getting variations in the leaves. things that I do for variation on the bark, and we'll be going through building those shaders, and slowly but surely we're going to be building more and more shaders all up to kind of week 6, and then we're going to start to really look at the renderer, V-Ray, the your materials, lighting a lot more, your lighting setup. For the first kind of 5 weeks, I just encourage you to get any HDRI that you might like and use that as the base and kind of render with that. Thinking about lighting, you should be thinking about lighting the entire time and trying to find that thing that might really kind of kick it to the next level. But in week 6, that's really when we're going to more specifically address that. So we'll talk about V-Ray suns, HDRIs, places to go to get great HDRIs, those libraries, so on and so forth. Week 7, hopefully everybody's kind of really trucking along at this point. So I'm kind of thinking that we can start to talk about some kind of icing, as it were, things in week 7. So I set up, in this environment, and they're actually kind of hard to see. There are little leaves or flower petals kind of flowing off in the image, and honestly, I need to kind of make more of it. They're really don't show up all that well. You can see them kind of dropping off here, and you can see a couple in different places right there. The contrast between, like the waterfall and them, it's not enough. So, but we'll start to look at, setting up particle-based systems to add a level of detail to things. We can look at grow effects and adding wind to your trees. All these things that are kind of up, really raise the bar on what you've been doing. If you have like a big grassy field, we can talk about adding wind to that. And then, for my environment, I did this kind of, waterfall. So I simulated it in Houdini and then brought it back as a series of PRTs. And right now it's erring, or not erring at me, but loading the wrong thing. But I moved my particles up. Now there we go. So we can talk about potentially, let's see where everybody's at, and looking at, water, water shaders, water in your scene. I obviously I'm not going to encourage anybody to additionally go into Houdini and start doing simulations or RealFlow or whatever your fluid simulator of choice might be. But when this is all said and done, I would like to do kind of a mini bonus lesson for you guys, and I will kind of break down the Houdini workflow that I did here and post that for everybody at the end, if anybody is interested. There's also a bunch of shader stuff that I do using Magma Flow for this, and we can talk about some of that. But let's see where everybody's at, and at that point we'll really make a call. And I'll probably even ask you guys, like, what specifically do you want me to cover, if there is something specific at that point. So moving into week 8, you'll see there's nothing there. So the expectation at this point is that you've got all of your stuff kind of up and running, and you've been scattering everything about, and you're really at the point of doing final rendering. So we'll talk about final rendering, your render setup, and if my render settings will open. We'll talk about render elements, what elements you might want to render in addition to your beauty. We can talk about compositing those. I use Nuke and Fusion. Fusion at Blur. Prior to that, I've years of Nuke. So if you guys want to see either of those, I can show that and workflow in that. Or Photoshop. Compositing your image successfully is a very important part of getting a final image. So I'm going to spend, week 8 on that, because the expectation is that you guys are creating your final image there, or during that last week, and you're really kind of honing in your settings. And we're going to talk about, V-Ray, the image sampler, adaptive, GI, different GI techniques, common settings. I will be using V-Ray 3. We will talk about V-Ray 3 versus V-Ray 2.4 and what's changed a little bit, what you need to be aware of. So all of that will be during week 8. Also, you'll be expected to be pushing your environments. Any last-minute details and modeling that you might need would also be done at that point. And then at the end of week 8, I've talked with some of my friends, and I think we'll have some other Blur guys come and do critiques for everybody. I don't know if anybody else saw the CG Society crits that we did, but I think we'll probably do something like that, like a large format go-to meeting, and I'll have a number of guys there to comment and give feedback on the environments that you guys have created, and I think that'll be really quite fun. In addition to that, I've also scheduled some guest artists, so to speak, to give kind of mini lessons for you guys on different topics. A lot of guys at Blur are really good at a lot of different things, so where I might have shortcomings, they pick up the slack, and they're good at maybe I'm hard surface in specific to objects and whatnot. There's a couple of guys that can really kick out some awesome hard surface objects like clocks and all sorts of crazy shit. So I'll probably have one of them, and then there's another gentleman who's very good with like optimizing V-Ray, and I'm going to talk with him, and he's probably going to come and speak as well. So you'll have a couple other little treats and whatnot that you'll have to look forward to, which I think will be pretty cool. So all of that being said, that is what we're going to cover, and if it is not clear what the expectation is for this week, let me reiterate. So this week, you will be creating your massing model. You will first be going out and getting a reference and getting a Vimeo account. Mr. Alex Roman, his pen name. So you will get reference image, figure out what you want to do, get a Vimeo account, and post that onto the forum so I can look at them. You will also be creating a base model. It's very rough model of what you're going to be doing, and looking at it through a couple of different cameras. You will post those up on the forum as well. Go ahead and post your max files, and then also show me a couple different camera angles of what you're going to be doing. But you will create this kind of scale object, so you have an idea of what the scope is. You will further detail it out, and then, as I said before, you're going to want to start thinking about poly count inside of ZBrush and maximizing the amount of polys that you can kind of push around inside of ZBrush. In which case, you will refine, based on the angle of view and what you're going to be looking at, different areas of your massing model. Refining being putting the detail or isolating areas of detail by themselves, not further refining by adding more edit polys and chamfering edges and all that. Do not do that. I repeat, do not do that. You don't need to. And let me show you why. Alright, so let's say I've got that initial... So this is ZBrush. And I'm going to be going into that into ZBrush in week 2, so anybody that's watching that doesn't really know it, don't worry about it. I'm not expecting that that you have this under your belt yet. If you do, that's great. You've got a leg up there. So this was, that one decimated test that you saw. So right now I'm 276 million polys. Or not million, wow. 276 polys for $1 million. Which we can't really do much with. You can see, like, if I try to sculpt this, nothing really happens. So we need to add, oh, that's cool. Oh, that's a subtool. So we need to add detail and subdivide this guy. So here you can see I have subdivided it a number of times, but why did my other tool go away? I don't want this one, actually. Oh, there we go. Alright, so what we can do is we can go in here and Dynamesh. So right now this is I exported as an OBJ this cluster of objects, and they've got intercolliding faces. It's just a shitting mess, and that's fine. It's totally cool because Dynamesh basically makes a unified skin of this object. And you can say, all right, I'm going to Dynamesh this guy. And it's going to think for a second. So this is at a resolution of 512. And what it did was take that object and resurface it and give me 172,000 polys from that. Now that's probably not enough detail to do much of anything. You can see if we kind of run just a standard brush over this, everything's kind of clumpy and crappy looking. So we might want to Dynamesh it at a higher level, and you can do that. Let me say 1028 resolution. 2048 is the highest it'll go, or 1032 apparently, because I can't type. Or it doesn't want me to do that. So we Dynamesh that. And wait a moment. Oh, apparently I masked something by accident. So it is doing its thing. Alright, so now I have 707,000 polys. Which is a much better base to kind of start with, more than likely. Yeah, you can see we've got some detail here. Now, once you've done that, so like I said, all of your interpenetrating objects and everything, that crappy model that looked like nothing, you can start to detail this now, and those interpenetrations, those basic geo objects, they become completely irrelevant. We have just remodeled this. And now we can further divide this to get more polys. So now we're 2.8. And you can see if you have created your objects too big or too much stuff going on where your eye isn't going to see, you're going to quickly get into, you've got millions of polys back here, which we're never even going to sculpt, and maybe not enough polys up here where the eye is going to see and we are going to sculpt. So that's the stuff to think about. And as I said, your massing models, they can be very, very basic. You can have interpenetrating objects to create the form that you want. So don't worry about how you kind of chunk it together. Really, it can be just a hot mess. Okay, and we will use this Dynamesh feature to make a unified skin out of it, and then additionally sculpt up on top of it. We'll get up to 7, 12 million polys on these objects, and then we will use wow, can't even think of the name of it. The decimation master, wow, to bring down that poly count, keep the detail where we want, and bring that back into max. Now, as you saw, those decimated meshes, they look like garbage. But for an environment that's not, it's not animating, we're not really concerned about that. We want detail where we want detail, and you know that the object doesn't have the best poly flow in the world. It just doesn't matter. We're going, excuse me, we're going to light it and shade it in such a way that nobody will care. Okay, so that is your week 1 assignment. I'm going to try not to die while giving it to you. Okay, so go through, make your environment, your massing model. Some additional assignments. If you guys don't know of Peter Guthrie, go check out this website. I posted it up online. He's got tons of great tutorials. When we start to talk about HDRIs, he's got tons of HDRIs. You can buy these like super cheap. They're super awesome. He's got some great stuff on his site. Ronan Beckerman, he's another one. If you do not know him, you should check out his site as well. Lots of great tutorials and other artists posting all sorts of cool stuff. Bertrand Benoit, I'm probably totally bastardizing his name, and I apologize. Also some great stuff and some pretty cool tutorials. Some of the food stuff that he does using 123D Catch are pretty cool, and that's good stuff. So you should check that out. And then 3rd and the 7th, if you have not, if for some reason you live in a hole and you haven't seen his films, you should go on Vimeo after you've created your account and check out the videos that he has made. They are, really breathtaking. So start to check out other artists. I encourage you guys to add to this list. This is like the tip of the iceberg. There are a ton of environment artists out there, and you should start hunting them down, seeking them out, seeing what they're doing, checking out their work, and becoming familiar with with them and what they're doing and where they're working and all of that. That is a very important part and component of of what we do, is kind of knowing the context that you're working in, and knowing what's been done, what type of reference or tutorials are out there on something that you might be needing to do, and then starting to think about how we use the tools that we use in other ways. I really like, I think Grant Warwick did a tutorial on this. This is actually using Forest Pack, and let's see. Oh, this is the Maya one, and then Grant Warwick went and did it inside of Max using Forest Pack. So this is a very different way of using a tool that we're going to talk about and get very in-depth with, and when you're done, you'll know easily how to do something like this. But it's kind of taking these tools and thinking outside of the box. Grow Effects, I think in the future, is going to have a lot more support for things other than just making trees, and it sounds like there could be some possibilities for linking particle systems and grow effect systems together, which would just be super awesome. I'm really excited for that to happen and hope that it does. So, as I said, get a Vimeo account, go online, start gathering reference, find other artists, start collecting all of that data into the forum, helping each other out, and pick your environment, post those reference images up on the forum, let me see what you're going to do, and begin to create your very basic Lollipop Land massing model of what you're going to be doing. I'll be checking in throughout the week, seeing what you guys are doing, and commenting on that. So, with that, get to it. Hi everyone, welcome to photoreal environments for film and broadcast. We have a lot of information to cover, so let's just get down to it. What you see before you is the masthead for the course. This environment I created for kind of making an outline for the class and going through the information that I would like to cover. So what you see is this cliff face with some vegetation, water surface, a hero plant or hero tree, the waterfall element itself, some distant trees. All of these we will kind of break down into individual chunks and weeks and localize them so we can attack them on an individual basis and then bring it back together at the end to create the image or images that you guys would like to make. So my thought is that each of you will be picking an environment, and this week you'll start by kind of looking at it and breaking it down. There's another video that you'll watch where I cover reference and gathering the reference and the areas that I suggest to go or websites I suggest to go. So watch that when you're done with this one, and you can get a better idea of kind of what I'm talking about. But really, you should all start thinking about an environment that you would like to spend the next 8 weeks working on. So obviously, something that has some breadth to it. Don't limit yourself to something that's just a couple of trees and some plants scattered about. Really think about how you can leverage the tool set that we're going to teach, or that I'll be teaching, and create something creative and awesome. So with that said, I want to kind of cover what we're going to go over, so you guys, while you're thinking about the environment that you want to do, you'll have this as a framework, basically. So in order to create this, I started very simple. I start with a plane or a box, and I simply put this out just to get an idea of scale. So I first started gathering some reference, and that is all of these images here. So I went on the trusty Google and gathered images from all over the place and started to think about, what do I want to do? And you can see some similarities here. I knew I wanted to create something that had this kind of hero tree. This tree is outside of my house, or these types of trees, and I really like them. In the spring they bloom with these really cool pink flowers. So I wanted to do something, incorporate that, and also do a waterfall type scenario. So here's those trees. So I began by simply collecting some reference, and I kind of liked this setup, this image here. So with that in mind, I created what would be a ground plane in actual world units. So everything that we're going to do in the course will be in world units. What do I mean by world units? We go over that in another video, but specifically your scene units, everybody is going to set to feet and inches, just so we can all be kind of, if I'm troubleshooting and working with you guys, I'll know that a rock is a foot or a pebble is a couple of inches, and we can see as you're building everything, when we're doing textures and whatnot, you'll want things to be in a real world scale, real world context. So I simply put a plane in, pulled up the edge, and started to think about how I might frame the shot. And in doing that, then I add this kind of very rough base geo, my little lollipop trees, Started to think about, that there might be some rocks in this area, some sort of larger protrusion here, and then obviously the cliff face here. I put in a camera so I can start to frame it and see what am I going to see, what am I not going to see. After I've done that, then I begin to refine my geo based on poly counts and surface detail that I'm going to need inside of ZBrush. So if I were to bring like one of these objects into ZBrush, this whole slab, we would have a ton of wasted polys back here, right? This, when we subdivide it inside of ZBrush, it's going to subdivide the entire volume, and really we're only interested in this front face for the most part. This front face and the edges, or the faces that kind of travel away from us until it hits the next rock surface. So it would really be a large waste of detail. So starting to think about that, and you guys are going to need to think about that once you do your very base model like this. Start to think about, all right, where am I going to need to be putting detail, and then refine your massing model as such to get the level of detail that you're going to need. And I'll show you a little bit of what I'm talking about inside of ZBrush to better illustrate that. So this is ZBrush. I'm sure you're all somewhat familiar with it. Some of those of you who are not, this is kind of what you will get when you open it up. This little lightbox guy will open, and you can just hit the lightbox button and close it. You can create a new document over here by saying document, new document, and down here is where you would specify the size of that document. By default, it always comes in at this 1273, and you can customize your setup to your heart's content, and I encourage you to do that. So I just create a new document. It actually makes it as large as possible. And what I would do once I've started to like mass out that geo, I will import it into ZBrush using, well, so you'll notice you'll have tools. There's a whole lot of other kind of flyouts here, subtools, geo. This can look a little intimidating for somebody that hasn't used it before. The areas that you're going to be most concerned with for this course will be obviously tools. This is where you load and save, import, export. Subtools, we'll be using this. I should point to the right area. Subtools, we'll be using this to create multiple pieces of geometry, all with the highest possible poly count that we can get. This Geo tab, this is actually where you subdivide the geometry. So let's say I brought this guy in, and excuse me, in order to edit this, if I started, I just drew it out, right? So I draw it out by clicking and dragging, and you might think a logical thing would be to draw onto that surface. I would just start clicking on the surface, but ZBrush is not like any other 3D program, and it originates in this 2.5D world. So right now you could just draw these kind of 3D objects into space, but you really need to think of this until we go into edit mode as more of like a 2D canvas. So with that said, I can make a new document, or document, new document, no. And if I pull this guy out by clicking and dragging, and now this time I hit edit mode, or T, now we're in 3D space.